Hey guys, we are back. Our 2023 real estate market forecast continues forever. We've got Dr. Chris Thornberg here with Beacon Economics.
Yeah.
For those of you that were at our forecast at the Fox Theater, we ran into a couple technical difficulties, and quite honestly, we've become so accustomed to shooting stuff in studio. We said, what the heck? Let's bring Chris in studio. Let's get a nice, clean version of your presentation. So we just did that.
And we have a chance to talk, because last time we didn't have a chance to talk.
We didn't do the interview.
Yeah.
So this is the deal. We just reshot Chris's presentation. For those of you that were there or saw it on our link, it's actually quite a bit different. You changed up the slide deck quite a bit.
Well, we continue to get more information, more get added to the story, particularly some of the story having to do with the piking crisis. And what I tried to do is give people a little better sense of that, because although the banking crisis, as I see it, doesn't have a direct impact on the real estate market, it will certainly have an indirect one, because the choices the Federal Reserve is going to make is going to have a big determination where the economy goes, which will, of course, in turn have an impact on real estate.
Right, so here we are. We're a minute in. We're talking banking crisis, and we already said Federal Reserve once.
Yeah.
So we'll see how many times we'll get. Everyone takes a shot every time we mention Jerome Powell.
Yeah.
So at any rate, but it's only been 3 weeks, and the presentation was, materially different. I just sat through it. It was a good solid hour. By the way, the entire video will be up shortly. It'll be kind of linked to this one. The entire slide deck will be available, which I think I've got a little presentation to keep me on track. So if you want Chris's slide deck, this is a link to my stuff. You also have a QR code. We'll get Chris's
At the very
stuff.
end of mine, that's right, yeah.
So, but let's start off with your recession and miserableism. It's how that has been the opening slide. And this isn't a criticism. I just think it is what it is. How long has that been your opening slide?
Forever, because every time you turn around, someone's telling us something tragic is happening, right? And whether it's the recession call of 2019, the depression call of 2020, the double dip call of 2021, and now the recession call of 22, and you're like, oh my God, year after year.
Right.
Here we go.
Right. So I don't want to, again, listen to Chris's video.
Yeah.
You just did it. I think you just said you are not calling, in the video that you just shot, you are not calling for a recession now or in the next 2 years. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, there should be no reason for one. And look, I appreciate it, particularly if you're in the real estate industry, it's funny because I often get people, particularly people in the real estate industry, going, you don't know what you're talking about. We're already in a recession.
Well, it feels like real estate.
Well, of course.
Right.
Yeah, real estate is, look, the Federal Reserve overheated the economy by pouring $5 trillion on it and causing consumer demand to go through the roof, right? Just absolutely explode. And they're trying to control the consequences of that by cranking up interest rates and hurting real estate.
Mission accomplished. Check the box.
Mission accomplished, exactly. And it just goes to the bizarre nature of their policy. You set off inflation by giving people all this money. You're not going to control it by tanking the real estate market. But that's economic reality. In his world, people are suffering because of inflation, and if you have to slap around a few real estate billionaires to help people, well, too bad.
I feel slapped. That's gracious.
Well, I know, but that's, it's bizarre.
Well, you had mentioned, and I don't have a slide for it, but it kind of ties into the miserableism, maybe not. I know a lot of that's media. Matter of fact, maybe I did keep that slide in there. I did. So this was from a couple of years ago. 30 to 40 million people are going to be evicted from their homes, all this sort of nonsense. Obviously, that never happened. But you mentioned the Robert Shiller book, Beware of the Narrative. You kind of seem to have segued into that. And you're talking about the narrative from the reality. And man, that hits home with me.
Yeah.
Because we do live in a certain reality, and you're generally saying that the reality and the narrative are so disconnected. But in what way? Things are better than what they feel?
Right. So it's interesting because, look, I've talked about in the last decade as miserableism, which is a great punchline. But underneath that punchline is an economist who is really struggling. Because I got a PhD in economics in what was called Chicago West. I mean, I learned the math, I learned the theory, I learned all this stuff. And here I am looking at a world that is not doing what my models assume they should be doing, which is looking at the data and responding accordingly. And let me go even the next step on that. There was a high-level person in our state government who I had an opportunity randomly one time. We went out, we sat down, we had scotch. It was him and I. And for the first time, I got to look at a high-level official in our government and go, come on, man, you're smarter than this.
What?
You're smarter than this.
Were
the
they?
stuff you're saying. Yeah, but he didn't say that. What he said to me was, Chris, put yourself in my shoes for a second. He said, let's say I just said, Chris Thornberg's absolutely right. His data's right, his model's right. This stuff I'm selling is completely wrong. I'm going to change all my policies. What do you think is going to happen to my next election?
Yeah.
And he says, and I'm like, oh.
So it's politics.
But let's go to the next step on that. It's so easy to poke fun at politicians. The reality is politicians win or lose on the basis of grabbing the right narrative. That is what they're doing. They're not setting the narrative. There is the occasional politician, the FDR, the Winston Churchill, guys who can truly set the narrative, right? Most politicians aren't that.
Right.
They live or die on the basis of grabbing the right narrative the electorate wants to hear. And what he said to me was very profound. What he said is, look, don't blame me. I'm giving the people what they want.
Right. Yeah.
So if the economy isn't broken, our heads are broken. Why have we devolved into this, what's the place? The only way I could put it is this national pity party.
Yeah.
We have, by far and away, the best quality of life ever in the history of the United States, one of the best quality of lives in the globe. And the only thing we can do is sit around feeling sorry for ourselves.
But again, that's your miserableism argument. I'm with you. I want to go back.
But you know what? I'm so far off the topic. But let's go back to what I was saying. But this is now. This is this miserableism.
Right.
What Schiller did for me, and I never got to the story there, what Schiller did for me was open my eyes to the fact that my discomfort is his discomfort. And he's pointing out the reality of these things as well. But more importantly, what he said was this is cyclical. In fact, what's interesting in that book is he talks about after the Great Depression, there was a very similar episode where for 10 years we sat around feeling sorry for ourselves and passing lots of terrible policies. And that was called FDR. What shook us out of that was World War II. So what I'm hoping is we don't need a World War II moment exactly to get us out of our rut. I don't know how you change the national opinion on this one. I don't know how you get people to understand context. That to me is beyond my pay grade.
You know what scares me, Chris? And I'm going to go in a different direction. And actually, I took a slide out of this as a reminder. I'm going to briefly make reference to it. I've liked to think that the people that are running the show are intelligent, smart people. And sometimes I really, really question that, more so now than ever. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and again, we said we weren't going to go into this because we don't want to go for hours and hours, but let's take a couple of minutes or a minute.
Yeah.
I'd like to think smart people. Barney Frank, Dodd-Frank, we talked about this previously. You said Barney's a smart guy. At least I think you said something out of that.
Well, I think Barney is. Actually, Barney was a very smart guy.
How do you allow yourself to sit on the board of directors of Signature Bank and have that fail? Okay. I don't understand. But before you answer that, because I'm going to the next one, because I think it's the same answer. Okay. The founding partner and CEO of Silicon Valley Bank was on the San Francisco Fed. Okay? Up until the day that bank failed. How do these smart people sit in those positions and allow that to happen on their watch?
Let's back up. Because remember the big picture I showed you here. I showed probably the most potent graph in my presentation when it comes to the commercial banking system was the delinquencies graph.
Okay.
In the fourth quarter of 2022, the delinquency rate for all loans in our banking system was 1.19%. Right. That's the
basically
lowest.
Zero for all intents.
Lowest it's ever been.
Right.
The delinquency rate on U.S. mortgages, the lowest they've ever been.
Right.
FICO score is incredibly high. Right. An enormous equity cushion in our real estate markets, one of the lowest debt-to-equity ratios ever. By the way, the stability of our banking system today is because of Dodd-Frank's.
Okay.
In fact, you might argue that the last decade would have been a better expansion had Dodd-Frank not maybe overdone it. They probably overregulated, made it too safe. But let me finish.
Okay.
But whatever, the lending system today is incredibly clean. This is not the crisis.
Right.
This is not what happened. What happened to the banking system had to do with the piles and piles of reserves that were poured into the banking system that were invested in securities. The Federal Reserve then reduced the value of the securities through their federal funds policy and then are forcing the banks to sell those securities at a loss because of their quantitative tightening. there are a lot of people want to point a finger at Signature Bank, at Silvergate, at Silicon Valley Bank.
Right.
And I get it. Oh, they did this wrong. They said, stop for a second. Back up. 100 boats are going across the ocean. A hurricane hits. A couple of them sink. The other 98 made it to port. They all sit around. They start talking. Why did those 2 boats sink? Oh, they didn't reef their sails in time. Oh, the hull had a material flaw. Oh, the cargo wasn't right. No. The hurricane sunk the ships.
Right. I'm with you, but there's the deal. Here comes the but.
Okay.
I think if the name Thornberg was on some legislation that is known by most people in the real estate industry in relation to regulating the banking industry so we don't, oops, I'm getting ahead of my thing, so we don't have those type of failures, okay? I don't think you would be sitting on a bank that failed. I think if you were sitting on one of the Fed board seats in San Francisco or wherever it may be, I don't think, and you were that person, I don't think you would also simultaneously be on a bank that failed.
There's no doubt.
I just don't see
I
how
appreciate
that happens.
And there's little doubt that Silicon Valley Bank made some errors. They had too many long-term securities. They didn't keep enough cash, particularly given a bank that had so many of its deposits in the form of FDIC limits plus deposits. They of all banks should have been being careful, and they weren't. They were going for yield. They were getting aggressive with it. But then again, this hurricane that got tossed into was completely man-made, and the man who made it was a guy named Jerome Powell.
Yeah, which I think is my next one. I got ahead of myself.
Exactly.
Yeah, there he is.
Yeah.
So, but my point's different. I understand the hurricane. I want to believe we have smart people that are making these decisions and making these policies. I mean, here he is.
Yeah.
I think I've heard you maybe indicate, my words, not yours, maybe
I'm sure he's very smart. I'm sure Jerome Powell is very smart. The question is, what is he smart at?
is he making the correct decisions? Though?
No, he's not making the correct decisions. He's
then we
making
have
the
the wrong guy.
political decisions. Look, this is the danger. It's interesting. Go back even to the concept of the temple.
Okay.
20 years ago, the Federal Reserve was a revered institution. It was a temple, and you didn't talk about it.
Right.
It was a bunch of bankers and economists who did their thing, and the argument was we didn't mess with them. They're smart people beyond our means. Let them figure it out because we know that they have the right motivations.
Right.
And it worked great. But the political system did not like that. And it started 20 years ago. They started attacking. And all the positions of the Federal Reserve Board started being taken away from that boring banker, that boring economist, and given to politicians.
Well, fair enough.
He's a smart politician.
I'm not an economist, but I've been in this business for 35 years. I imagine there's some point in time I could go back and say, oh yeah, I paid attention to what the Feds were doing. Nobody in my business has paid more attention to what the Fed's been doing in the last 18 months than realtors.
Yeah.
Because again, whether we're in a recession or not, real estate's we're struggling.
Yeah, absolutely.
But with Powell, let me just kind of cue this up here a little bit. So interest rates, and let's understand the Fed funds rate and mortgage rates, connected but not connected. But at the end of the day, this is you. Let's listen to you.
March, even though we're recording this, so we're a few days early, and we're in the low threes. Any idea where we're going to be at the end of the year rates?
I think rates are going to drift up. Like 10-year bond rates are coming up.
Yeah.
You're talking about we're getting that return to normalcy.
Right.
The federal government's going to be absorbing a lot of free cash out there, $4 trillion in issuances this year.
Okay.
That also suggests interest rates are going to continue to go up. Now, what do we come into this at? You could probably get, a mortgage in the 4% range coming into this.
I think a year ago around 4.
I anticipate by next year we'll probably be back to that 4% range.
So
Now, the question is what happens beyond that, and that, of course, has a lot to do with inflation and the federal government and everything else. But I would argue that, if they don't do much, heat up inflation, you could get back to 6 or 7% mortgage rates in 5 to 6 years.
Oh, well, there you go. There's the quote.
So,
two things. Can I say two things quick?
I know exactly what
The
you're
first thing
gonna
is
say
we had
before.
terrible haircuts.
We
You could
did.
tell it was a pandemic.
Well, and look at my head and my neck. Oh my God!
Oh, that too.
Let me get off of this slide here. Okay, well, this is an interest rate chart. So,
But the other thing I
Actually,
said
think
wrong there
remember
is I said 5 years to get back to 7%. It only took Jerome Powell a year and a half.
Well, but this is the deal. But so this chart only goes back for about a year. That video of Chris making that clip was 2 years ago. That was March of 2021. So we're in year 2, I suppose, of the pandemic at that point in time. Rates were about 4. We softened up on rates and we're down in the 3s.
Yeah.
And again, I should have redone this chart. This goes back 1 year. If you come here, we're at 4, 4.5.
Yeah.
But we went from 3
Below
to 7.
3. Below 3.
Below 3. Okay. 2.5, 2 3/4
Yeah.
to 7-ish.
Yeah.
In 18 months.
Brutal.
How do you do that? How if I'm Jerome Powell?
Okay.
How do I do now? Is it the fact that he started too late? I mean, because it seems like we were too low for too long.
Well, you started what?
Raising. Well, again, I look at this for very narrow mind. I look at this from what does mortgage rates do? And I know it's way bigger than that.
Yeah, but you said started late. Started. I know.
Were,
I know
were
you
rates
mean.
too low for too long?
No.
That's my question.
Yeah, not really. I mean, it wasn't the rate choices. Look, the Federal Reserve does not set interest rates.
Understood.
They set the federal funds rate, and that has implication for interest rates. But go back to the inverted yield curve. That's because as much as he slammed up the federal funds rate, actually bond rates didn't go up that much. I mean, we have an inverted yield curve right now because a 1-year Treasury bill has a higher interest rate than a 10-year Treasury bill. That's what an inverted yield curve is, right? So that's what we're dealing with today. So you have to recognize that the real issue for long-range interest rates is supply and demand of capital. Okay? So just think of basics, just like there's supply and demand of oil, there's supply and demand for capital.
Yep.
When he started quantitative easing and he put $5 trillion in the economy, there was an inordinate supply of capital flowing on the U.S. economy, ergo, interest rates went down.
Right.
Now he's fighting inflation, again, by trying to claw some of that back through quantitative tightening, a little bit on the federal funds rate. But it's really the quantitative tightening that is suddenly causing M2 to come down. And that is that's the real deal killer here. Because now you're really shrinking the supply of available capital within our economy.
Right.
And that is when interest rates start to shoot up dramatically because there's just not enough supply around. And remember, it isn't just the Federal Reserve is pulling back the supply, it's also the federal government continues to increase their demand. We still have a $1.2 trillion federal budget deficit,
right,
which is a huge amount of demand from the market. And he's clawing it back. Well, what's going to break? What's going to happen? Well, what they need to do is because the federal government wants that money, that means they're going to make you, the homeowner who wants that money as well, to pay a higher price for it.
True. And you said, I don't have the video queued up. I played it at the forecast for those
Right.
who were there. And I hate to put words in people's mouths, especially when they're sitting right next to me. We talked about when things potentially break.
Yeah.
And in the real estate mortgage industry, I believe you said, well, with 7%,
Yeah.
bad things can happen.
Yeah.
Well, we've been at 7. We pulled back quite honestly.
Yeah.
That's crazy how things change.
Yeah.
We're less than a month away from the forecast. Interest rates, mortgage rates, again, I'm very, very specific. Real estate mortgage rates, for the most part, have improved by 0.5 point.
Right.
We're now in the 6.25 rate.
Yeah.
But you were correct. Real estate breaks at 7.
Yeah.
The crazy part for me is if you look at these and you can kind of track these rates along with the supply and demand, felt better. I felt like it took a year for the consumer to get used to a higher interest rate, from a 3 to a 6. Felt like we kind of got used to a 6. Consumers kind of...
Okay, let's take a step back.
Okay.
Real estate doesn't break at 7%. That's ridiculous.
Well,
you know
it
that as
breaks
well
for
as
a
I
period
do.
of time.
Well, it breaks for a period of time, exactly. And that's what you need to say aloud. Because look, you go back to 2004, 7% was fine. That was par for the course.
Understood. And we did just fine.
My father was a real estate agent. I've told
Yep.
you the story. Best year, I asked him, what was the best years of your life as a real estate agent? And he said, 1983, 1984, 1985.
Right.
But, Dad, interest rates were 15%, 14%.
Yep.
It didn't matter.
Right.
The economy was on fire. People wanted housing. We'd finally cleared inflation. We had gotten past the back-to-back recessions caused by the inflation fight. And it's just a cost that people were willing to bear. This is the same thing this time. If you just create some stability, we'll eventually work ourselves out of the hole.
Right. Well, thank you
but
for
he
correcting...
doesn't do that.
Well,
And
true.
He just keeps, it's going to get more. We're going to do tighter.
But thanks for correcting me, because I got to be very careful. We say things, and you hear them back later, and I'm like, oh my God, I know those are the words I use, but that's not what I meant. So when I say real estate breaks, again, you got to remember, a good chunk of my audience that's watching this are real estate agents, but at the same time, I got to be careful, because real estate, when I say the market breaks, we look at something like this. You know, prices have been fine. You have a chart, hey, prices pulled back. Prices have actually been flat and actually increased in a little bit for the last 3 months.
By the way, which is bad news for your real estate agents, because it means that sellers are not capitulating, and if not capitulating, that means you're not going to be a lot of transactions.
Well, that's which is the flip side of that is the inventory is just decimated.
Exactly.
I mean, we just have nothing. Which then, the reason I said the market breaks, I'm being very personal. I run a real estate operation. We need two things in order to make money at Coldwell Banker Town Country. We need a price that's reasonable because our income is based upon price, and then a certain amount of volume. This chart, I don't know if it illustrates it well, but the transactions from Riverside County are down year over year 35%. Yeah. Orange County 50% month over month. 50% fewer transactions in March of 2023 than March of 2022.
I'm surprised it's only that.
It's a
But
big
I'm
number.
surprised it's only that.
It's a big number.
But again, you've got, but also let's remember a year and a half ago, things were going crazy.
They were. And
Sales were way up,
True.
prices were going rapidly, everybody's making money. You knew there had to be a cooling off effect.
Well, knew that had to be cooling off, but this is the part for me personally. Again, you look at it, you think you analyze it, you say, okay, you can't do a 20% price appreciation in 2020, stacked on another 20% price appreciation in 2021, 40% jump.
It doesn't make any sense.
It makes zero sense.
Yeah.
So in 2022, we're like, oh, well, geez, this stuff can't continue forever. So, well, guess what? We got to slow it down. I think we're all okay with the price softening a little bit, flattening a little bit, but the volume is tough. So,
again, it's the severity of the interest rate increase.
Right.
There is not. I just can't even imagine a guy like Alan Greenspan just behaving in this insane way.
Right.
It's just like they threw $5 trillion at the economy, pretending nothing was going to happen, and something did happen. The economy went crazy, inflation took off.
Right.
And then they cranked up the federal funds rate from 0 to 5% in what, 9 months?
Well, I feel like you're making the argument, though. You're making the argument, do we have smart people that are making
No.
these decisions? Or,
But what I mean,
or are they smart, but they're making them for the wrong?
They're making political decisions based on the narrative. They're not making economic decisions based on reality.
So we're not.
That's where it gets scary.
So, and I know you can't answer this question, but when do we grow up? So here's this slide. This is your presentation, and all of Chris's slides. I pulled this out of his presentation from 20 minutes ago, and this caught me because this is California housing permits. And bottom line, we're not building enough houses.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you had a whole different narrative on this particular slide, but. So in California, we don't build enough houses. We're not going to build any more houses. What are we doing? I mean, so how do we solve this problem if we're not going to build?
But do we have to build? Density. Simple as that.
Well, we have
and
to,
that's your
but we're
point.
not.
That's the weird thing about it, right? So your real estate agents are seeing no liquidity. People aren't moving, which is a problem for them from an income perspective, but it's also a problem for the overall supply problem because, again, we build at the top, supply at the bottom. That is now broken down, and this supply problem becomes that much worse. Suddenly, every business in California starts suffering because you just can't get enough people.
But you get to smart people making the decisions. I think most people would look at this and say, all right, we have to get ourselves in a situation where we can build some housing in California. And that's nowhere near in sight. That ain't happening.
Because the local narrative is very simple. We don't want housing. We don't want people. I don't want my world to change. I don't want growth. I want my neighborhood to look like exactly like it did 20 years ago.
Okay, well, and it's working in that now we've got migration out of California exceeding.
And there are probably people out there who are perfectly happy for that.
Right.
I tell you what. Let me and not to dive into this too deeply, but a guy said to me the other day. He said, I don't care. Huh? He said, well, I don't care. Let them drive prices up. He goes, I don't want more traffic. Screw them.
Right.
Let them leave.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, here's a NIMBY who is dishonest with things. And that really, if that's our state's opinion, we don't want you people. Go away.
Right.
We want the little people. Go move to Texas. Fine. That's the decision we make politically. If that's how we vote, fine. Make the decision. Where I go crazy is when we have people going, I don't want that apartment building built in my neighborhood. Why can't my kids afford to live near me?
Right.
This is where I start losing because the hypocrisy is palpable.
Well, but that's your where the narrative. It's a little different context, but you've got a reality, and then you've got
people believe their own narrative. I mean,
Right.
I had this debate one time many years ago where I was saying, it was at some public meeting and people were screaming. First one come up, stop building apartments, you're ruining my neighborhood. Next one gets up, oh, rents are too high. Don't build, rents are too high. And I stood up and I said, you can't do that. You have to make a choice. You're either going to build to keep prices down, or you're not going to build and prices are going to go up. And there's some old lady in front of the audience who goes, that's not true! And everybody started clapping. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah. Well,
here we go.
yeah, but I don't know.
Bring on the mob.
There's a certain amount of common sense that you have to sit back and say, okay, you know, you have to be adults.
We live in
need
a world.
adults.
Look at presidential debates. Look at the claims people make.
Well, we get 60 seconds to answer a question that needs 4 hours. Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. Well, we said we were going to be out of here in 20 minutes. I think we've already done 20. Let me hit a couple other slides here and we see where we go. So this slide. You can see the little bitty tail about. We've seen a little bit of pullback in prices.
Very small. Smaller here than Orange County, LA, by the way.
Well, yeah. Well, I just did some numbers before this, but now you've got me concerned a little bit. So we were seeing basically a little bit of price destruction from April, depending upon where you are. Anywhere, March, April, May.
Price destruction, and we wonder why we have narrative problems. Price
Because I used the destruction.
Destruction.
I'm sitting next to an economist.
Destruction.
It didn't make me sound smart. Didn't I sound smart there for a
Destruction
second?
seems like a strong word.
We've seen a well, that's funny.
Prices have come down from their insane highs a little bit.
They've been destroyed by 3% or whatever it happens to me. I thought I was sounded. Did I not sound smart there for just a second? Well, but that's funny. It's not funny. If I bought my house years ago, or let's just say in COVID, I bought it in 2020, and I saw 40+% appreciation, and then I saw a little bit of pullback in property values. I'm like, okay, I saw a little bit of pullback in property values. My property values are still up 20, 25, 30%. Maybe I put down money. I'm super healthy. You have another chart in here that basically talks about equity of homeowners. It's off the charts, all the rest of that, which is why we're not going to have foreclosures. We're not going to have all this gloom and doom. Fair enough, but
Not in the single family front. Multifamily is a different game.
okay. Or well, again, we don't have time to talk about commercial
Fair
and
enough,
multi or high or just commercial.
Because again,
properties.
we got to keep in mind that the commercial situation and the single family are completely different.
Understood. And again, not to get on the commercial, but every single office building I am in currently or was in currently has been downsized anywhere from 60 to 75% square footage. I just don't need it.
Yeah.
We don't need those buildings anymore.
Although vacancies in Illinois are coming down right now. Overall office vacancy rates, oddly enough.
Okay, and it makes sense. Well, because the fundamentals are good. I mean, we're still in
fundamentals are
business.
fine,
People are
exactly.
still doing our stuff. But getting back to the price destruction, being a little hyperbolic here. If I've been in my house for a while, I don't care.
Right.
If I bought my house in last 12 months, that doesn't feel so good.
Yeah.
But there is this narrative. There is this narrative of, the world's going to end. It's 2008 all over again. And people do get a little wound up with that. And then when you see interest rates from 3 to 6, it's rough. So, okay, I won't use price destruction anymore. So I think I pulled a couple more slides out of here. This just goes back to the supply thing. And you just ran that up. And I'm like, oh, my God, the supply is just killing us. Killing us. I don't know that we need to go through that too much more. This, I think, was basically your slide about not a chance of a market collapse.
And this is Barney
touched on
Frank.
it.
This is Barney Franks right here.
Yeah.
Like it or not, yes, he's probably kept people out of home ownership that could have gotten in, but at the same time, he's handed us one of the fundamentally most sound housing markets this nation has ever seen.
And there hasn't been a bad loan done in, 15 years?
Exactly. And if it wasn't for insane Federal Reserve policy over the last few years,
Right.
I don't think we'd be having this conversation. Mortgage rates would be in the 5% range. Maybe they'd be 15% higher than they were a few years ago. Yeah, you wouldn't have had that amazing 21 and first part of 22, but then you wouldn't be suffering all this pain right now.
Right. Well, but again, I've been doing this a long time. Nothing wrong with the 5% interest rate. We can do that. Nothing wrong with the 7% interest rate. We can
Absolutely.
do that.
We can do
but
it.
there is a certain amount of shock. And I guess that's kind of where in my industry I sit back and like, well, how long
sticker shock.
Right. How long is it going to take
what
for
it
that
calls it,
shock
yeah.
just to kind of just wear off a little bit? It's like, well, this is it. And then of course you couple it with, what percentage of homeowners out there have interest rates on their mortgages right now?
Here's the
3%
upside.
level.
Here's the upside, and this you got to remember. What your friend is right now, and I know it sounds weird, your friend is inflation.
Okay.
Because the problem here is the way to think about it is this. Home prices are here, and they should be here. If they were here with 7%, there wouldn't be any problem. But they got pushed up here because of 3%,
Right.
and now we got getting 7%. And so prices have to come down for liquidity to start heating up again.
Or rates got to.
But that's not going to happen because people don't walk away from home value. There's no capitulation. Prices aren't coming down. So what makes this housing market get better? Well, it's the fundamentals to get back up to where prices are.
Right.
What's going to cause this to happen? Inflation.
Yeah.
Because inflation pushes earnings, inflation pushes incomes, inflation pushes people's buying power. So inflation is actually your friend right now. Oddly enough, the banking crisis could end up being a very good thing for the residential real estate market for the very simple reason that it could force the Fed to sit on its hands. And by sitting on its hands, that means inflation runs a little bit more.
Right.
And when inflation runs a little more, that's going to push fundamentals back to the level which is going to allow the market to get back to normal levels of liquidity.
Also sitting on their hand, basically, I don't know, use the word pause. They're just going to chill on their,
well, I don't know.
Interest rate
That's
stuff.
the question. It is so profound. I cannot, and I try to emphasize this at the end of my presentation. I probably should have made a bigger deal out of it. But where does the Fed go?
Right.
You know, look, economically, it's very simple. You sit on your damn hands. And to be clear, and let me back up. Let me explain something very clear on this. They have two tools right now, federal funds and quantitative easing, quantitative tightening, okay? If they raise the federal funds rate from 5% to 7%, but did a little more quantitative easing,
Right.
we're fine. Housing markets will be fine. Everything will be fine. But inflation is going to take off. On the other hand, if they push the federal funds rate from 5% down to 3%, and then they continue quantitative tightening, it's absolutely irrelevant, the decline in interest rates, because you're going to have a massive banking crisis on your hands.
Right.
Because of the decline in deposits. So the banking system is like a ratchet effect. You put the money in, it's almost impossible to take it out. The answer is the inflation horse is out of the barn. Let it run, and we'll get out of this mess.
Let it run.
But again,
Right.
we have a very important presidential election
Right.
coming up
The
in 18
politics
months.
will prevent that.
Inflation, you know the stories of inflation. Everybody's angry. The consumer confidence
By the way-
index is where it was in the middle of the Great Recession in a 3.5% unemployment rate. What the hell is wrong with us?
Well, that's the
We're
disconnect you're
angry.
talking about. That's the
Exactly.
disconnect. Well, I skipped ahead to your final slide.
Yeah.
Again, Chris did his whole-blown presentation. You can see that your narrative on this slide. But yeah,
What does the Fed do?
yeah.
Is it politics or economics? What do you do, Jerome?
I don't know. What
I
does
don't
he
know
do?
either.
Yeah.
And that's what you got to pay attention to. And by the way, again, not the federal funds rate. That's my point. You got to pay attention to his In the last
Quantitative
statement, they didn't even talk about what they're going to do in quantitative tightening, quantitative easing. What happened is because they had to suddenly back up a bunch of deposits,
They
they
opened
actually
up-
quantitative easing.
Yeah, they
easing it.
opened up the window.
They
and
open up the
everybody
window, there's a
shows
bunch
up
of money, and everything's fine.
Right.
Again, what are you going to do about M2?
And what do they do with that? So in a matter of what, 24 hours or 3 days, all of the tightening that they had done in the
No,
prior
not all
quarter.
about.
Well, yeah, but
they put
like
300
3
billion
months,
back in.
like 3 months
They took
worth of it.
600 billion out, caused a major bank crisis, put 300 billion back in.
Right. Smart people. I don't know.
Again,
I don't know.
I don't like to call people dumb. It's not a nice thing to say. My
Yeah,
mother
but if the
taught me better.
decisions are all politic, then
Political. Yeah, I know, but that's
we're children.
that's the world they live in.
But we're the citizenry of the country. We're children. We can't hear. We can't.
Yeah.
Just
You're
give us
right.
good news and everything will be fine.
Yeah,
Until it's not.
yeah.
Yeah. Didn't you do? Wasn't that your thing? Like hot till it's not. Was that last year's or 2
Yeah, I think
years ago?
something like that. Yeah,
Hot till,
hot till it's not. That's a good couple years ago. It's not anymore. Yeah.
Hot till it's not.
Hot till it's
Okay,
not.
well let's get rolling through this. I got a couple other things. Hey,
Ooh.
so for some of my audience out there, you made them notice some things in the news, LA Times, et cetera. So what's happening there?
Well, apparently the center will no longer work with Beacon Economics. So
Okay.
we had our contract expired last December. We were in renegotiations when suddenly these stories started showing up in LA Times criticizing our research at the center. Now, to be clear, the stories are all wrapped around a report we did last year for the International Franchise Association. They asked us to do a study of AB 257, which was the FAST Act, which was we don't know, but could substantially increase compensation costs. And we did a little analysis, and we showed that, I know this is shocking.
Labor costs. So-
Labor costs, yeah.
Right.
And we showed that a substantial increase in labor compensation costs leads to higher food costs. Well, let's go back to narratives, right? In the wonderful, idealized world that we saw in, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington,
Yep.
we all agree on the economic impacts of policy, right? We all sit down and have an adult conversation about the impact, and then we decide whether or not it's morally right or wrong. So in this case, if you think fast food workers should get paid more, okay, that's fine. But the consequence is higher food prices.
The hamburger's going to cost
and then
more.
exactly, and then we can sit down and have that conversation.
Right.
But that's not the world we live in anymore. The world we live in now is there's a whole industry of economists, or I won't even use that word because they're not really, who go out and basically say that policy has no impact. There's a whole little line of literature for some of these labor centers that suggests that somehow or other you can raise compensation costs almost limitlessly without having any impact on prices, which of course is silly.
Right.
But that's the world. That's the world they live in. What they do is they say, this is the policy we need, and by the way, it's costless, so do it. Well, anyway, the point of all this is we said it cost.
The cost of a good is going to go up.
It's going to go up.
That,
And that's what we
essence,
said.
was your
and,
report.
and as a result of that, we set off a furor. We had the SEIU worked with some faculty at some of the UC to get a petition to investigate our center, and there were folks inside UC Riverside claiming we were propagandists. You saw this all in the LA Times.
Yeah.
There are some folks out there claiming we've never done anything on the Inland Empire. We just trademark the name of the school and sell attack research.
Well, and for the record, you've been doing my forecast on the Inland Empire prior to the relationship.
We have done
with UCLA.
hundreds and hundreds of papers on all sorts of important issues, policy issues, economic issues for the Inland Empire. And to me, it's tragic because we had a wonderful partnership between the school and us to run the center for the good of the Inland Empire. And tragically, the school, I guess, is just so afraid of dealing with the unions right now, particularly after the nasty strike last year, that they just completely capitulated. They just walked away from the deal. It's easier not to recontract, and we'll figure it out. And and I'm left, of course, with a scarred reputation. But
I don't think so.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Can I say one thing on this? And this is one of the things that really bothered me about the LA Times article. They're like, well, the school is still considering whether or not to continue to work with us on the annual forecast conference.
I saw that.
Time out. Can I say something just to the folks in the Inland Empire? Look, I left UCLA a bunch of years ago because I had a disagreement back then when I said that real estate was a bubble and going to cause a recession. And my boss at the time told me I was an idiot. And I said, I'm going to stick by my beliefs, and I'm going to leave, and I'm going to start my own company, Beacon Economics, and I did. By the way, my first forecast conference I did was here in the Inland Empire, 2007, where I stood up in front of a group of people in this ground zero of that mess and said, it's going to get ugly.
Was that the Rio Mac conference?
Might have been. I can't even imagine. But
I think that's where I first saw you.
Needless to say, I've been doing work out here for 16 years now.
Yep.
Of those 16 years, 6 was with UC Riverside, and it was a wonderful partnership. And I'm sorry we can't continue the partnership. But the idea that it's their event, no.
Yeah.
We've been out here for a very long time. Not only was I the first guy to tell you it was a mess out here, I was also the first guy in 2010 to say it's not a long-run mess. It's not 1991. This isn't a decade of nowhere. I said back then, as tough as this is right now, it's going to be an incredibly rapid recovery, and the Inland Empire is going to emerge as one of the strongest economies in the state and the nation in a few years. Nobody believed it in 2010. It was a complete mess. By 2013, I was 100% right.
Right.
And I've been talking that talk out here. I will continue to support this economy. I will continue to do good work on this economy. I will continue to believe in this economy because that's what I believe in here. And I'm not going to be bullied into a different opinion by anyone.
Yeah. Well, again, I've known Chris for a while. I've certainly known you before that. We've become friends over the last several years, so I don't know, maybe that diminishes my endorsement, but I don't get it. I mean,
tragic.
I don't get it, and I've read the articles, and unfortunately, the articles don't really address. They draw the contract. We got to investigate and all the rest. I'm like, oh, okay.
The classic attack.
Right.
This is nothing more than a standard smear campaign. It's been done before.
Well,
I'm not gonna. If anything, I'll take it. I'll take it as a sign of confidence. Hey, I've made it. They actually think I'm worth attacking.
Well, again, where it is about Joanna, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly supporting you. I support Beacon. We have even before this.
We're not going anywhere, and most of our clients couldn't care less about the noise. It's irrelevant.
At the end of the day, and I think you had mentioned this. We had talked about this previously. Hey, we did a report. This is our analysis. If you agree with it, great.
Yeah,
if you don't, if you disagree with it,
you set the ground level conditions, and then you decide what to do.
Well, the sad part is, and this is why, honestly, I think this will be interesting to see how this shakes out over the next several months and years.
Yeah.
The core of this issue and this, changing your relationship with UCR is basically over something I think anybody without an economics degree can understand. If I have to pay you X amount of dollars more as an employer, which we do, we've been dealing with it on a different, has nothing to do with like fast food workers. You know, minimum wage in California, guys, in case you haven't noticed, when I first got into business,
$15.50.
correct. And 5 years ago, 10, and a couple years ago before that, it was 8. But let's just go the last 5 years.
And now they want to push it to 22
Well,
for the
correct.
fast food restaurants.
Well, and don't think that, I mean, I'm a small business guy. I'm not like some gigantic corporation. It's just like we can just absorb that 50% increase in our labor.
Yeah.
And guess what? Our consumers pay a higher price today than what they did before.
But to be clear, it's particularly profound for certain industries. The minimum wage overall doesn't have that big of an impact on the overall economy. We're not talking about the overall economy.
Right.
We're talking about the sector that's directly impacted by that, fast food restaurant.
Correct. But last I checked, cost of a Big Mac's a little bit more than it was before.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you put 20% up, it's probably still pretty cheap.
At any rate, I'm sure you're going to come out fine. It is what it is. It's an unfortunate thing. So we are getting close to done. I think my next slide has a QR. It does. Okay, so this is the deal. Chris, number one, thank you so much, as always.
Pleasure to be back.
All of Chris's slide deck is available at this QR code. Chris's QR code is also in his presentation, and that'll be available in this video as well. So anyway, our 2023 real estate market forecast continues, but at least for now we're done. So we'll get this posted in the next couple of days. Once again, thank you, my friend. Keep smiling. You ready for dinner?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. Have a good one.